Because I have the skill to devour and steal other people's curses and skills, I was used and tossed aside by the best generation of my time. As I was dying, cursing my betrayers, I tried to steal a skill that would let me regress through time. If it worked, I would get a second chance to take revenge on all those bastards. Wait, it actually worked. Now, regressing to when I was 13 years old, I'll use this skill to its fullest to humiliate and kill those who used me in my past life. While I'm at it, I'll build an empire with strong people by my side, my powerful butler, my cute fiancé, and my vampire master. Can't really say life isn't going well anymore. Krosh Walheim looked completely drained, barely managing to stay upright while someone shouted at him, asking what the hell he was doing and telling him to hurry up and steal the curse afflicting Lord Arthur. Even at his absolute limit, Krosh answered that he would take the curse right now, his voice rough but steady, and immediately began channeling his magic. He introduced himself without pride, almost mockingly, saying his name was Krosh Walheim, a failure born into the strongest family bloodline in existence. As the magic circle finally completed, he activated his technique, Black Hood, and unleashed it without hesitation. The curse binding Arthur shattered instantly, collapsing as if it had never existed. Black Hood was a skill designed for one purpose: stealing curses from others. Every ounce of negative energy was absorbed directly into Krosh's body, leaving him crumpled on the ground. Only then did it become clear that he was a member of the Blue Sky Generation, one of the so-called heroes meant to save the world. Arthur's companions rushed to his side, forcing a potion down his throat while Krosh lay discarded on the ground, barely conscious. Arthur slowly lifted his gaze toward the sky, his expression freezing as he spotted a skeletal knight soaring above them. The creature's skull locked onto the group, its presence alone suffocating. Without hesitation, it hurled a massive fireball that erased an entire mountain in a single blast. Arthur stared in disbelief and muttered whether they truly expected to fight the Blue Knight of Death with so few people. Then with a hollow sound he dropped his sword. He said it was impossible to win. Calling out to his companions, he told Sigrun, Abela, and Mary to come with him. The girls embraced Arthur tightly, as if trying to anchor someone who had already given up on everything. Krosh, completely stunned, demanded to know what Arthur thought he was doing. Arthur answered calmly that he was ending everything right now. Krosh felt something snap. He thought the world's last hope had just been extinguished, leaving nothing but ruin behind. Furious, he demanded to know whether Arthur had any idea how many sacrifices had been made to bring him this far. He shouted that countless people had died, while Arthur wasted time chasing skirts and acting like a hero. That was when Sigrun stepped forward and told Krosh to shut the hell up. She introduced herself as Sigrun, the third princess of the Empire, and said Arthur had done his best. She called Krosh a worthless piece of trash who could only steal things and told him not to dare lecture Arthur. Krosh stared at her in disbelief, rage boiling over as he clenched his fist. He demanded to know how they dared speak that way to someone who had saved their lives over and over again. He shouted that without his ability, none of them would have survived this far. Since they clearly forgot, he said he would remind them, starting with Abela. Abela was a mage from the Magic Tower, known as the Red Witch of the Blue Sky Generation. Krosh reminded her that without him, she wouldn't even be able to use magic, since speaking triggered her curse. Despite that, she had demanded he steal her curses countless times. He remembered how, while suffering under her curse, she had attacked him just because he went looking for painkillers. Her habit of looking down on everyone, acting superior, hadn't changed at all. Next, he turned to Mary, the Empire's strongest spear. He called her an idiot who fell for every curse imaginable, then cried and begged him to clean up her mess every single time. Then he faced Sigrun again, the same princess who dared call him trash after he sacrificed his own eyes for her. He asked whether she had any idea what it felt like to help her. He remembered how she used to bully him at the academy simply because he belonged to the Starland Kingdom faction. He had been beaten constantly, mocked as a failure who couldn't even fight back. People even questioned whether he was truly a Walheim. Despite everything, he endured it all and healed her eyes. He said he did it because Sigrun was part of the Blue Sky Generation, the last hope for the world. Compared to her, he saw himself as nothing but a disgrace to the kingdom, someone born without any talent for combat. He asked what the point had been of cleaning up their messes for so long. With someone else, maybe it would have failed, but with Arthur leading them, they should have been able to save the world. Krosh remembered the first time he saw Arthur, standing on the front lines of the Blue Sky Generation. Even while leading those idiots, Arthur shone. Krosh admired him deeply, enough to decide he would follow him forever. Back in the present, Krosh demanded to know why Arthur was giving up so easily. Arthur said that now, at last, he could tell the truth. Since the world was already ending, he explained that he was going to start everything over from the beginning. The words hit Krosh like a hammer. Arthur confirmed it calmly and revealed that this wasn't the first time he'd witnessed the destruction of the world. His special ability was regression. Krosh stood frozen as Arthur continued. He explained that he had acquired a memory inheritance technique, allowing Sigrun, Abela, and Mary to regress while retaining their memories. Krosh quickly understood what that meant. Starting over with experience would massively increase their chances of stopping the apocalypse. That had been Arthur's plan all along. Arthur declared he would begin again, only with the three girls. Krosh asked what would happen to him. Arthur smiled faintly and said the words that shattered him completely. Krosh was no longer needed. Arthur explained that Black Hood had been useful because it allowed them to steal curses that couldn't otherwise be broken. But regressing with Krosh was inefficient. His body and mind were already ruined. It would be better to get a fresh version of him next time. Only then did Krosh truly understand. He had been disposable from the very beginning. Arthur even told him not to worry, saying he'd use him again in the next life and the one after that. Then he said goodbye, coldly promising they'd meet again. Krosh tried to stop him, but Arthur and the girls began to fade away. As he reached out desperately, Krosh realized he had always known the truth. If Arthur had truly considered him a companion, he would never have allowed the others to treat him the way they did. Screaming, Krosh begged Arthur to take him along. His consciousness began to fade, and he realized his life would end before the world itself was destroyed. He refused to accept that. Black Hood didn't just steal curses, it could also steal skills, though the difficulty was extreme. He had never dared use it on Arthur before, but now there was nothing left to lose. He activated Black Hood, targeting Arthur mid-regression. A massive shadowy hand emerged, grasping toward the hero. Krosh watched in shock as Arthur's regression skill was absorbed. The transfer succeeded. Arthur stared in disbelief and asked if Krosh still hadn't given up. Krosh answered that Arthur had already experienced countless world endings, and every time Krosh had been left behind to die once he became useless. He asked Arthur how many times he'd felt that same despair. This time Krosh said it was Arthur's turn. Arthur wondered if Krosh had lost his mind. Krosh only smiled, saying maybe Arthur was right, the world was doomed anyway. And this time Krosh would be the one to save the next world. Light flooded his vision as the Blue Knight of Death launched a massive attack that hit both of them. When his eyes opened again, he was waking up in a familiar room, the house where he lived as a child. A notification informed him that regression was complete. Krosh Walheim was 13 years old. Information flooded his mind the moment he stabilized. World erosion. A phenomenon where another dimension gnawed at reality itself, corroding the world from the inside. When erosion occurred, the environment twisted unnaturally, and creatures from beyond poured in. These monsters were called erosion species, and among them existed beings that looked almost human. Those were the worst ones. They led the others, commanded them, and turned entire regions into hell. They were known as world eroders. Whenever one appeared inside a city, panic followed instantly. People ran through the streets screaming, begging for help from the nightly orders. That was when those who fought erosion stepped forward, wielding weapons and magic, preparing for battle. They were called the Blue Sky Generation. Krosh remembered it clearly. He had been one of them. He hadn't joined because of talent or strength, but because his body could seal curses. In the end, he had been treated like nothing more than a lightning rod for disasters, absorbing filth no one else wanted to touch. Betrayed by his companions, abandoned when he broke down, his life had been nothing short of miserable. That memory snapped him awake. He bolted upright in bed, gasping, eyes darting around the room. For a moment, he didn't know where he was. Then recognition hit him, his old room. The walls, the furniture, the smell of wood baked by summer heat. Just moments ago, he had been standing in frozen ruins, yet now sweat clung to his skin. Azure Pine Mansion, the place he had lived after being discarded. Understanding washed over him. His last gamble had worked. He had stolen Arthur's regression skill. A laugh escaped him before he could stop it, sharp and disbelieving. Then doubt followed. How had Black Hood succeeded? Most people believed the skill had no real restrictions, but Krosh knew better. Black Hood created a lock the moment it targeted something. That lock was based entirely on how much the owner valued what was being taken. Even something worthless, like a rock from the roadside, became nearly impossible to steal if the owner treasured it. Skills, identities, memories, those should have been absurdly difficult. The more valuable something was, the more conditions appeared. The difficulty scaled brutally, yet when he targeted Arthur there had been no lock. That realization made his breath catch. Arthur had wanted to get rid of regression. The idea shocked him. A power that let someone reset the world, discarded like trash. But when Krosh thought back, it made sense. Arthur's hollow eyes, his exhaustion, the way he moved as if following a script. If he had lived through endless destructions alone, repeating doomed worlds again and again, sanity wouldn't survive that. Regression wasn't a blessing, it was a curse. Arthur had planned to pass his memories to Sigrun, Abela, and Mary, then disappear, leaving Krosh behind as usual. The fact that Black Hood worked only confirmed it. Arthur had lost regression and been left behind in a dying world, swallowed by the meteor storm summoned by the Blue Knight of Death. Gone, Krosh let out a bitter laugh. He had taken the very thing Arthur wanted to throw away. If anything, Arthur should be thanking him. His smile twisted as old memories resurfaced, being ignored while absorbing curses, being treated as if anyone could do what he did. The pain, the despair, the slow erosion of his mind while everyone looked the other way. Arthur deserved it. Piece of shit, Krosh muttered. Later, standing in the hallway of Azure Pine Mansion, he stopped in front of a mirror. The reflection startled him. Small, young, barely 10 years old, short but not weak. His body carried lean muscle, the result of swinging a sword every day just to survive in the Walheim family, the strongest martial house in the Starland Kingdom. That narrowed the timing. This was right after the trial ceremony. The Walheim trial was meant to prove one's strength and determine which god would answer their call. The stronger the candidate, the higher the rank of the god they could contract with. That was why the direct line of the Walheim family had always been revered. Krosh had been the exception. Born without martial talent, no god had answered him. The ceremony ended in silence. Soon after, he was expelled from the main house and sent to Azure Pine Mansion, the dumping ground for failures. Now only he knew how the world would end. An ending even the Blue Sky generation failed to stop. He stared out the window, wondering if it was even possible to prevent it. A vision of destruction flickered in his mind. For a brief moment, doubt crept in, then he clenched his fist. It didn't matter whether he could do it, he had to. If the world ended, he'd die with it. There was no other choice. As he started thinking about his first move, footsteps approached. A familiar voice called him young master. Krosh froze. Arioto, the butler, stood there alive. At this point in time, he hadn't died yet. Arioto was the only servant in the mansion and the only person who ever took care of Krosh despite him being labeled a failure. And yet, Krosh remembered clearly. This was the man who gave him poison at 14, the man who taught him what betrayal felt like. The scene shifted in his memory. A girl fighting with everything she had, delivering a devastating blow to a massive monster while nobles watched in awe. She was only 15, yet even knights couldn't approach her. Charlotte Walheim, his older half-sister, her expression was bored, fitting for someone called the Sword Saint. The nobles whispered that a genius born once every 1,000 years had appeared, and the family head's expectations were immense. Among them sat Barakin Walheim, Krosh's older half-brother. Hearing them say the family no longer needed to fear ruin, hatred twisted his face. He thought about annihilating the entire bloodline. Charlotte was too dangerous. Her mother was a problem too. That left only one option. The useless failure. The memory shifted again, Barakin smiling maliciously as he approached Arioto offering poison. He claimed Krosh blocked his path to success. One drop, he said, and Arioto's daughter's treatment and financial problems would disappear. Arioto hesitated. He had raised Krosh like his own son. Barakin cornered him, asking whether he would choose another man's son over his own daughter. With nowhere left to run, Arioto lowered his head. The betrayal was sealed. Krosh remembered finding Arioto later collapsed on the floor. With his last strength, the butler apologized. Krosh cried, breaking down beside the body of the man he saw as a father. In the original timeline, guilt had consumed Arioto, leading him to eat the poison stew himself. Back in the present, Arioto tried to act ignorant. Krosh confronted him calmly, saying he knew everything. That he knew about the poison, about the daughter. Arioto was speechless. Krosh realized pushing further would only corner him again, so he changed tactics. He stepped back and said that if he hadn't been born a failure, Arioto never would have received that order. Arioto didn't understand. He expected rage, tears, hatred, not this. Instead of punishing him, Krosh extended his hand and invited him to follow. Then he gave a strange order. Cut the wall. Confused but obedient, Arioto drew his sword. Aura flowed from his body as he executed a perfect cut. The wall split cleanly, revealing a hidden passage. Arioto stared in shock. Krosh congratulated him casually. Approaching a chain door, Krosh stopped Arioto from cutting it. The chains couldn't be cut. This time he would test himself. Activating Black Hood, he shattered the lock and chains with ease. Arioto stared stunned. When asked if he had contracted a god, Krosh lied easily, saying it was an insignificant one. The butler, shaken by the sudden change in the boy, remembering he is of the same bloodline as the greatest genius of the Walheim family, decided to keep silent and swore loyalty, at least until Krosh finished what he had started. Krosh understood. Regression always came with a cost. This was only the beginning. The butler who betrayed him in his previous life was still alive in his memories, like a thorn that never stopped hurting. Krosh Walheim thought about that for a moment and wondered if Arthur had deliberately allowed him to steal the regression ability because of those inconsistencies. Maybe it was intentional. Maybe it was all part of something bigger. If he managed to cure the butler's daughter, then loyalty would naturally follow. With that in mind, Krosh decided that for now, increasing the number of pawns under his control was more important. He told Arioto to do whatever he wanted for the moment, trusting that he would figure out how to deal with the girl's condition later. His priority right now was the secret library. As he opened the door, an intense glow burst out from within. The light was so strong that it forced him to squint, and the moment he stepped inside, a powerful energy surged through the air. His breath caught in his throat. Even after enduring countless curses born from world erosion, he had never felt something that sent chills through his body like this. There was no doubt about it, his secret manual was here. A fiery aura wrapped itself around one of the shelves, and Krosh immediately knew he had found what he was looking for. Several books emitted sinister waves of energy, heavy and oppressive. This was the secret library of the Azure Pine Pavilion, a place where the failed ancestors of the Walheim family had recorded their techniques and memories. These were not divine gifts, nor blessings from the heavens, but the results of relentless human effort. Within these walls rested the secret manuals that could lead someone to the highest peaks of power. Long ago, this place had been open to anyone, but it became forbidden because of a single individual, Valhaes de Merisheim. He was remembered as the greatest failure in the history of the Walheim family. His appearance alone was enough to intimidate, and yet his life was considered a disgrace. That was until he was consumed by world erosion and transformed into something terrifying. After that, he became the strongest being of his era. With that thought lingering in his mind, Krosh reached for the manual left behind by that ancestor. As his fingers wrapped around the book, a triumphant smile spread across his face. The manual is mine now. Valhaes had been both the greatest failure and the most powerful existence the family had ever produced. When he revealed his strength, the strongest figures in the world had challenged him one after another. None of them stood a chance. With overwhelming force, he crushed them all. No one could stop him. The technique he wielded was called extreme blood poison. To use it, one had to absorb world erosion itself. But to avoid losing his mind, Valhaes had developed a secret madness control technique. Half of the book had been burned long ago, which was why Krosh had never understood what truly drove the man insane. But now, standing here, it became clear. Perhaps Valhaes had simply failed to control the rage brought by erosion. Krosh remembered the moment he himself had been struck by a curse of world erosion and how he had weakened it using Black Hood, neutralizing it with another curse. The principle was the same. If opposing forces could cancel each other out, then it was possible to control the rage of the extreme blood poison. A realization struck him like lightning. If he could steal a curse that controlled rage, he could suppress the other one. Two opposing curses clashing and balancing one another. In his mind, the collision of those forces formed a blinding explosion of light. And in that moment, he understood he could reach the same heights as Valhaes de Merisheim. Confidence filled his chest. He called out and Aluard immediately appeared before him. Krosh gave his first order without hesitation. From now on, no one is allowed to enter the Azure Pine Mansion. The butler bowed deeply, understanding his intent without needing further explanation, and left at once to carry out the command. As he walked away, Arioto reflected silently. Since the young master had overlooked his mistake, he would repay that debt with absolute loyalty. From this moment on, he would reject Baron's offer. His one and only master was the young lord. Elsewhere, Baron exploded in fury the moment he heard the news. He demanded to know why the butler had dared to refuse him and cursed him for serving a useless good-for-nothing. His gaze fell on a newspaper article featuring Charlotte, and his irritation only grew. Both the so-called genius of the century and that failure irritated him beyond measure. If only that filthy blood hadn't interfered, he and his sister Lilish could have protected the pure lineage. And the tension in the room thickened as Baron ground his teeth in rage. He barked an order and a servant rushed in. Without hesitation, Baron commanded him to go to the Azure Pine Mansion and find out why the butler had changed his mind. The servant returned shortly after, pale-faced. He reported that entry was completely forbidden. Arioto had personally blocked the entrance and warned that no one would be allowed inside, not even the family head. Baron was stunned, then furious. That arrogant failure, he spat. Back in the library, Krosh sat in meditation, slowly circulating his energy. He inhaled deeply, releasing a faint purple aura as he clenched his fist. His heart pounded. Had he finally reached the entry level of an expert? Aura cultivation was divided into stages. Aura user marked the beginning, then came expert, master, and finally emperor. The second stage, expert, held the largest gap of all. It separated ordinary people from true geniuses. Krosh had just stepped into that threshold. Yet his sister Charlotte, only 2 years older than him, was already approaching Arrow Master level. Even in his previous life, she had been a monster. Still, despite her strength, she had fallen during the catastrophe, left broken amid the ruins. Compared to her, he was still weak. He lowered his head, troubled by the weight of the road ahead. Could he really protect the world like this? He wouldn't know unless he tried. In his past life, he couldn't even use aura due to a curse. But now things were different. Even if he couldn't compare to Charlotte yet, the secret manual left behind by a so-called failure gave him hope. He could become much stronger. For now, that was enough. At that moment, Arioto approached and congratulated him on reaching the expert level. Krosh brushed it off, grabbing a towel and wiping the sweat from his body, saying it wasn't worth boasting about. He then asked why the butler had been waiting. Arioto bowed respectfully. "Young master, your fiancée has arrived, Lady Bianca Harden." Krosh froze. The image of Bianca, the white demon, flashed through his mind. The woman who would one day become a pawn of the world erosion and slaughter countless lives, even defeating one of the 10 strongest beings in the heavens. but he quickly calmed himself. Right now, she was just the youngest daughter of the Harden family. When he saw her waiting at the gate, he understood everything. This was nothing more than a political marriage. The Waldheim family wanted to discard a failure, while the Hartenhart sought ties to the strongest martial family in existence. They were both being used. Still, he needed to talk to her anyway. Bianca Harden, the youngest daughter of the rulers of the North, had been cursed before she was even born. Her mother had suffered from world erosion during pregnancy, and that curse had seeped into the child. The result was the Snow Doll curse, one so severe it reached the soul itself. It made it impossible for her to form a contract with a god. Born as a sacrifice for her mother's life, Bianca was treated coldly by her own family. Krosh wondered if she hated him. He only hoped that her feelings wouldn't interfere with his plan to steal her curse. The Snow Doll curse was the key to controlling the rage of the extreme blood poison. Noticing his disheveled appearance, Arioto offered to fetch clean clothes. Krosh thanked him with a faint smile and asked him to bring the guest inside. 5 months earlier, Krosh had shoved Bianca away, yelling at her to get out and accusing her of only wanting the Waldheim family's power. She didn't say a word, only lowered her gaze and endured it silently. He had kicked her out without hesitation. Later, she recalled how her father had explained everything. For the Harden family to survive, they needed an alliance with the Waldheims. With her beauty, winning over their youngest son would be easy. He had placed a hand on her shoulder and told her that the fate of both families rested on her, emotions or not. She knew right from wrong. And she knew that if she weren't forced into this political marriage, she would never have to deal with a cynical, foul-mouthed failure like Krosh. In the end, she had decided she would be the one to reject the engagement. Back in the present, Krosh realized he might have been too harsh in his previous life. Now dressed properly, he tried to ease the tension, joking that serving hot tea to someone with a sensitive tongue was cruel and that he'd scold the maids later. Bianca simply stared at him in silence. Trying again, he suggested a walk in the garden, mentioning that there were flowers there that didn't exist in the north. He asked Arioto to bring macadamia nut cookies, and the butler immediately complied. As they walked, Krosh commented that her journey must have been long and mentioned they would have many chances to meet now that they were engaged. She quietly agreed. He joked that she sounded more like a commanding officer than his fiancé. She stared at him again as if reassessing everything. Something felt off. The last time she saw him, his gaze had been sharp and cold. Now he felt different, and she had never told him she liked macadamia nut cookies. In the garden, Krosh commented on the peaceful atmosphere, but she suddenly interrupted him. "Are you really Krosh?" The question hung in the air. He felt awkward and asked if he seemed that different. Without meaning to, his aura leaked out. The moment she felt that sinister pressure, her face went pale. Terror surged through her as she bowed deeply, apologizing for speaking out of turn. Inside, Krosh panicked. That wasn't what he intended. His memories of this period were blurry, but one thing stood out clearly. The look on her face was exactly the same as when she died before the North Sea Pavilion in his past life. Thinking quickly, he claimed his personality had changed because he had formed a contract with a god. She accepted the explanation and congratulated him. Seizing the chance, he said he had a proposal. She immediately assumed he wanted to annul the engagement, which offended him deeply. He asked why she would think that. Then he began to belittle himself, saying he understood if she didn't want to marry someone like him. She frowned. Why did a Waldheim have such low self-esteem? With a firm voice, she told him that she was his fiancée and that this would not change. The sincerity in her words struck him deeply. He couldn't remember the last time someone spoke to him like that. He steadied himself and told her the truth. He wanted to take her Snow Doll curse. She was stunned. Even the greatest curse breakers had failed. Why would he want something like that? He admitted that he intended to take it for himself and promised to grant her any wish in return, even annulment of their engagement. She studied him carefully. With her lack of emotion, she saw things clearly. He was treated as a failure, isolated from the main family. Perhaps he had simply reached his breaking point. She recalled what a mental-type mage once told her. When someone reaches their limit, they either collapse or change completely. Those moments were dangerous. And if someone close to her reached that point, she should stay with them. She grabbed his hand. "You don't need a curse to control yourself," she said firmly. "You can overcome this." Krosh flushed, trying to explain, but she ignored him. She said she would visit him often, maybe even move closer. He froze. Didn't she hate him? She squeezed his hand and said that even if she did, she couldn't abandon someone standing at the edge of the abyss. She didn't deny it. Krosh realized she acted decisively once she made up her mind, but she was completely misunderstanding him. Seeing no other option, he activated his ability in secret. Purple energy wrapped around her hands as he attempted to extract the curse. Suddenly, the energy rebounded violently. A condition appeared. To unlock it, he had to become her friend. He realized the curse was fused with her body, a birth curse, and becoming her friend might be harder than becoming her fiancé. If he let her return home, her transformation into the white demon would accelerate, so he decided to keep her close. For now, listening was the best choice. He said he was happy to see her more often. She replied that she would first consult her father. As she left, he calculated it would take at least a month before her return. He decided to use that time to read as many secret manuals as possible. The next day, Krates arrived at the mansion. Confused, he watched until a familiar voice called his name. Bianca. She announced she would be living there from now on. He was stunned, and just like that, they began living together. Time passed quietly after Bianca moved into the Azure Pine mansion. At first, everything felt strange and stiff, like two people forced into the same space without knowing how to exist together. But little by little, that awkwardness faded into something calmer, almost natural. One morning, Krosh woke up and found Bianca sleeping right beside him again. Her breathing was slow and steady, her silver hair spread across the pillow like snow. He yawned and rubbed his eyes, then gently shook her shoulder. "Hey, people are gonna get the wrong idea if they see you here." She slowly opened her eyes, completely unfazed, and replied in a soft voice, "Good morning." "What are you doing here?" That made him pause. "That's my line," he muttered. Krosh continued his intense training, spending hours meditating, circulating his energy, and pushing his limits. Each day he felt himself growing stronger, even if progress was slow. Several months passed like this. He often thought back to the day Bianca first arrived and announced, with total calm, that she would be living there from now on. He had been completely stunned at the time, barely able to process her words. When he asked if her family had agreed, she answered simply that they had approved immediately without any objections. That response troubled him. She was only 12 years old, living far from her family in a place filled with strangers. Yet she showed no fear, no sadness. Maybe her lack of emotion made her indifferent to such things. Still, he couldn't help feeling uneasy. Even so, he saw this as an opportunity. If he could grow closer to her, maybe he could finally break the lock on her curse. As time passed, the end of the year approached. With it came the memory of something important, the opening of the Lin Academy. The academy had been founded jointly by the four great kingdoms and the empire, created to train warriors capable of resisting the world erosion. It accepted students between the ages of 15 and 20. In his previous life, many of the members of the Blue Sky generation had emerged from this place, rising into monsters of terrifying power. Just thinking about them filled him with frustration and anger, but he calmed himself. This time was different. He knew their weaknesses now, he knew how they thought. When the time came, he would take everything from them. He calculated the time carefully. He would turn 14 next year. That gave him roughly 1 year to prepare, 1 year to grow stronger. Still, during training, he began to sense a limit. No matter how much he pushed himself, his growth slowed. The beginner-expert stage seemed to be the ceiling of what he could reach with the secret manuals alone. To break through, there was only one option left. He needed Bianca's curse. That day, he found her sitting in the living room, quietly reading a book. "Were you waiting for me again?" he asked. She nodded calmly. "I can't leave you alone," he sighed. Ever since summer began, she had followed him everywhere like a little chick. He even joked once, asking if she planned to follow him into the bathroom too. She tilted her head. "Can't I?" That nearly broke him. He wondered when she would finally see him as a friend. Maybe then things would become easier. Trying to change the mood, he suggested they go out for a walk. Before she could answer, Arioto appeared, announcing that an invitation had arrived from the Star Sanctuary. Krosh froze. He didn't remember this at first, but slowly the memory returned. The Star Sanctuary was an annual gathering in the Kingdom of Starin. Nobles, warriors, and elites from across the continent gathered there to build connections and form alliances. Back then, he had barely attended, staying isolated in the Azure Pine mansion. No wonder his memories were hazy. With a serious expression, he realized someone important would be there. He accepted the invitation, partly to honor his promise to Arioto and partly because he needed to ensure the old man wouldn't do something reckless over his daughter again. When he told Bianca, she immediately said she would go too. The butler merely nodded, but Bianca warned him that people would surely criticize him there. He agreed and warned her that she might also become a target of gossip. Maybe it would be better if she stayed behind. But she shook her head firmly. "Protecting my partner is a fiancé's duty." Her words caught him off guard. He stammered that he wasn't asking as her fiancé, just asking how she felt. She grew thoughtful, and once again that same expression appeared on her face, the one filled with quiet sadness. She remembered how different he had become these past months, how he always asked what she wanted to eat, how he brought her to the library, how he covered her with a blanket when she fell asleep, a kind of kindness she never even received in her own home. It's so genuine that it almost erases the awful first impression she had of him. Almost without realizing it, she admits that she no longer dislikes him and says she will go with him. This time, not as a fiancé bound by obligation but by her own choice. That single sentence leaves Krosh Walheim completely stunned. He freezes, words getting stuck in his throat, stammering like an idiot before finally nodding and agreeing, still trying to process what just happened. The scene shifts to a carriage rolling toward a seaside castle. Someone casually asks if that really is Garu Hall. Inside, Krosh looks out and wonders if these people truly have money to burn, renting the most famous tourist spot in the region like it's nothing. His thoughts drift, and he reflects that nobles are respected because they fight world erosion in place of commoners. That's how it's supposed to be. But then he thinks about how many nobles neglect their training, drowning themselves in endless parties, and he can't help wondering if this is really the future of Starin. If that's the case, then maybe there aren't many decent people left at the Star Sanctuary either. They enter the hall, their arrival announced loudly as Lord Krosh Waldheim and Lady Bianca Hardenheart. The moment their names echo through the room, whispers erupt. People murmur about the fall of the Waldheim family, about how such a beautiful girl is being wasted as the daughter of the northern rulers, and how they heard the two are engaged. Krosh ignores every nasty comment. To him, mingling with fake nobles is just painfully boring. Then someone mutters that an interesting person has arrived. Krosh turns and notices a young man lounging on a sofa with two others. Instantly, he realizes these aren't just decorative nobles. The first is Barak Hogma, the tiger-blooded boy who would later join the Blue Sky generation. The second is Magpie Elfin Emilia. The third is Anix Glazer, the wooden bow. These three will one day be known as the three heroes of Starins. Krosh figures the only reason they're paying attention is because of his sister, Charlotte. He remembers how, during a past event, she crushed everyone who challenged her and even complained that the Star Sanctuary should be renamed a dumpster. She found the whole thing so boring that she swore never to return. Judging by the atmosphere in the hall now, Krosh is pretty sure she already caused trouble here before. Bianca tugs gently on his sleeve, pulling him out of his thoughts. She tells him not to mind the voices around them. He explains that he was just thinking about Charlotte. Only then does he notice that Bianca herself is also the target of whispers, yet she's still worried about him. Touched, he pats her head and tells her not to worry. He genuinely doesn't care what they say. He scans the room again, wondering when that man will arrive and whether he's even coming at all. The hall suddenly goes silent as everyone turns toward the entrance. With exaggerated flair, Lord Darling Danfelion is announced. Krosh sighs internally. Speak of the devil. Danfelion strides in, the weirdo among weirdos, lord of the alchemist's castle. Krosh remembers their first meeting vividly. Back then, he was completely covered in curses when the young alchemist appeared. Instead of fear, Danfelion's eyes lit up with excitement as he examined the curses like rare artifacts. He started rambling about erosion techniques, claiming he might actually be able to heal him. Before Krosh could even respond, Danfelion grabbed him and asked if he wanted to be his guinea pig in exchange for a cure. Not waiting for an answer, he assumed Krosh was too exhausted to reply and began treatment on the spot. When Krosh tried to stop him, it somehow turned into the alchemist leaning in way too close. Krosh screamed and demanded to know what the hell he was doing. That was his first encounter with the man who would one day be called the greatest alchemy king in the world. Back in the present, Danfelion makes his dramatic entrance. Some girls gush over his looks, while others complain that he arrived late on purpose just to grab attention. Krosh knows there's no way that Show-Off would miss a gathering of his peers. He leads Bianca to the food table, telling her to wait there. She nods happily, already eating figs he brought her. With practiced grace, Krosh turns and walks toward Danfelion, who watches him curiously, feeling like he's seen this boy before. Then it hits him that's Krosh Waldheim. He looks way too much like Charlotte. Danfelion approaches with sparkling eyes, asking if he's Charlotte's younger brother and whether he has business with him, or if he's just here because of his stunning looks. Krosh replies calmly, saying he knows Danfelion has been researching world eroders and asks if that interests him. Danfelion laughs, calling him a provocative little brat, and warns him that since he caught his interest, he'd better be ready. He leaves the room and slaps a Do Not Disturb sign on the door. Inside, Danfelion picks up one of the displayed weapons and casually asks how old Krosh is. When he hears he's 13, he comments that his aura doesn't match his age. Krosh replies that he's already graduated from the academy internally and doesn't have much time, so he wants to get straight to the point. Danfelion tells him to speak. Without warning, Danfelion throws a sword at him. Krosh catches it reflexively, barely having time to react before Danfelion attacks. He blocks the strike and demands to know what that was about. Danfelion admits he wanted to test Charlotte's brother. Krosh thinks he's a massive pain in the ass, but the alchemist reminds him he had something to say. As they exchange blows, Krosh starts fighting seriously, shocking Danfelion, who wonders if this boy really was a talentless failure. Krosh admits he trains every day and decides to destabilize him by bringing up his curse neutralization research. He offers to help. Danfelion is stunned, questioning what a brat knows about alchemy. Taking advantage of the distraction, Krosh corners him with a sword at his neck and explains the theory behind neutralizing curses with curses themselves. To become a first-class alchemist, Danfelion needs proof. Danfelion lowers his sword, intrigued. When Krosh activates his curse-stealing ability, Danfelion feels his aura and is completely shaken. If what Krosh says is true, this could prove everything. Grinning greedily, Danfelion asks what he wants in return, even joking about becoming his boyfriend. Krosh tells him to shut up and asks for medicine that weakens the curses he'll collect in the future. Krosh reflects that even the Blue Sky generation couldn't stop the world's destruction, so a failure like him has to use every possible method to grow stronger. Danfelion realizes the rumors about Krosh's crushed motivation were wrong. One sibling is an overwhelming genius, the other a twisted eccentric. He loves it. Danfelion asks if Krosh plans to attend the newly founded Lahan Academy. With a confident smile and dark energy forming in his hand, Krosh answers that it's obvious. Danfelion eagerly accepts the deal, promising to make the medicine and more. Krosh then asks about the discoloration disease. Danfelion explains it's incurable, skin turning bluish-black before death. Krosh insists he can cure it. Danfelion says it's impossible, but Krosh knows Danfelion himself will complete it in the future. With absolute confidence, he says Danfelion can do it. Pride stirred, the alchemist accepts. They seal the deal with a fist bump. Before leaving, Krosh asks if Danfelion likes Charlotte. "I love Charlotte," he replies passionately. Krosh questions the boyfriend joke, and Danfelion explains he also likes men. Krosh panics, yells that he doesn't, and runs off as Danfelion calls him his future lover. Krosh returns to the hall, scanning the crowd until he sees Bianca being grabbed by the wrist. She looks terrified and calls his name. In an instant, Krosh kicks the man in the face, sending him flying. He accuses him of trying to take his fiancée by force and calls him trash for touching a 12-year-old girl. The man breaks down, admitting he was following Princess Claudia Starin orders. Krosh immediately senses something is wrong. Thinking about the second princess, he realizes the true mastermind is Anix, the same man who once obsessed over Charlotte. With disdain, Krosh exposes the scheme, takes Bianca's hand and walks away. As they walk to meet Anix, Krosh asks Bianca why she didn't obey the princess' orders. She replies that Krosh told her to wait, that's what she had done. Krosh, blushing, says she did well for waiting like he asked. At the door, Barak greets them, confirming Anix Glazer is waiting inside. Krosh pauses for a second after Barak steps aside, already sensing that things won't stay simple. Barak, the tiger-blooded swordsman, watches him with open curiosity, his tail flicking slightly as if he's already itching for a fight. Krosh knows exactly who he is. A dual-wielding maniac with sharp instincts and an even sharper temper. Among the future members of the Blue Sky generation, Barak's combat sense is notoriously unpredictable. Krosh has no interest in getting tangled up with him tonight. Just as Krosh reaches for the handle, Barak suddenly stops him and says he's also curious, that they should settle things right here. Krosh reminds him that combat is forbidden inside the Star Sanctuary. Barak snorts and replies that if he fought Charlotte, then fighting her little brother shouldn't be an issue. He adds that Krosh looks way weaker than his sister. Krosh remembers hearing that Barak lasted longer against Charlotte than Anix ever did. Even among experts, Barak's skill level is slightly higher, and that makes him dangerous. Krosh exhales slowly. He would really rather avoid this, but the look in Barak's eyes tells him there's no walking away. With a clenched fist, he accepts the challenge. Barak strikes first. Krosh dodges the blow by a hair's breadth and counters with a powerful punch. He stomps hard against the ground to gain momentum and follows up with a devastating kick. His eyes flare with intense energy as he activates instantaneous strike. The impact slams Barak into the ground with terrifying force. Krosh stands still as the dust settles. Barak groans from the floor, complaining that Krosh isn't holding back. Krosh replies calmly that Barak was the one who challenged him. Instead of backing down, Barak grins wildly and asks to continue, saying he wants to grab his weapons first. Blood drips from his nose, but his excitement only grows. Krosh watches him from above, already knowing it's over. Barak suddenly freezes, confusion washing over his face as his body refuses to respond. He collapses again, completely defeated. Bianca asks what the hell Krosh just did. Krosh explains that he used one of the Walheim family's secret arts, instantaneous strike, an ancient technique created by the family's renegades. It unleashes maximum destructive power at the shortest possible distance. It was the only technique salvaged from Amatsu Hall after it was burned to the ground. Thanks to it, Krosh survived countless life-or-death situations. That was his strongest secret art, and Barak won't be getting back up anytime soon. Against expectations, Barak cracks a grin and calls him Lord Krosh. Krosh ignores it and tells them to get inside. They open the door and come face to face with Anix Glazer, who is waiting with an infuriatingly smug expression. Anix calls out to Barak, only to be met with silence. Krosh and Bianca stare at him without a word. With a crooked smile, Anix comments that he's surprised Krosh managed to defeat his colleague. Krosh replies that this was obviously why Anix left Barak guarding the door. Krosh openly exposes him, saying he knows Anix used the second princess as bait to lure him here. That's why he came personally. Anix tilts his head, intrigued, asking how Krosh figured it out. He admits Krosh seems very different from the rumors and wonders if they were wrong. Krosh confirms the rumor about him being a failure is true. But if Anix loses today, that rumor is going to change a little. With a calm smile, Krosh adds that he plans to steal all of Anix's abilities. Anix remains silent, analyzing him, still wearing that confident grin. Krosh prepares himself. He remembers the past clearly. From the academy all the way to the Blue Sky generation, he and Anix were together. Back then, Anix was considered an old friend. But looking back, Krosh knows their friendship existed only because he was useful. Useful in the worst possible way. He remembers being thrown toward a monster after falling into a trap. All his companions had already been defeated. Hanging desperately from the edge of a cliff, he begged Anix for help. Anix hesitated, realizing that if the truth came out, he would lose his place in the Blue Sky generation. After a brief pause, Anix decided that if Krosh alone died, no one would ever know. With cold logic, Anix explained that internal power struggles were already bad enough. Krosh would be expelled anyway, so blaming everything on him would be easy. Since everyone already hated him, the incident could be buried without effort. With a sick smile, Anix thanked Krosh for being his friend until the end. Krosh remembers the fury and betrayal of that moment, questioning what the word friend even meant. He screamed at Anix, saying he never considered him a real friend, accusing him of sticking around only because of Charlotte. That confession stunned Anix. Anix admitted that was exactly why he hated him. He mocked Krosh, saying he had no ability, only annoying intuition, always trying to find flaws in everything. If Charlotte really was getting married, then their relationship ended there. With a twisted smile, he added that Charlotte wouldn't want a funeral and a wedding on the same day. Krosh cursed him as a scumbag. His grip slipped. As he fell, he wondered if that was truly the end. Then Arthur appeared, grabbing him at the last second and asking if he was okay. That was the moment they became teammates. Looking back, Krosh knows that was the beginning of another long chain of misfortune. Back in the present, Anix remembers being expelled from the Blue Sky generation after Arthur testified against him. He scoffs, wondering how Krosh ended up now. With a smug smile, he comments that Krosh's way of speaking and even his face resembles Charlotte's. Krosh realizes Anix hasn't changed at all. Krosh steps in front of Bianca and tells Anix not to say his sister's name so casually. He asks if Anix really thinks they look alike. Purple aura erupts from Krosh's body as he charges forward without hesitation. He declares that he is just like his sister, the kind of person who accepts any fight thrown his way. Anix doesn't flinch. Krosh launches a powerful kick, but Anix summons wooden roots to block it. Using the roots as footing, Krosh propels himself into the air and slams a brutal kick to his side. Suddenly, wooden tentacles wrap around Krosh and hurl him into the ground. He lands safely, already preparing his next move, irritation flashing across his face. Anix really is a pain in the ass. Anix mocks him, asking if that's all he's got and suggests he use a weapon. He activates his family's secret technique, Moku Tentauseki, a skill that strengthens and freely manipulates plants using aura, multiplying them and granting regenerative properties. Krosh Walheim bent down and picked up a piece of wood from the ground, still wondering if Anix had really just told him to use a weapon. A challenging grin crept onto his face as he stood back up and warned that, in that case, he would fight using his opponent's own wood. Anix let out a mocking laugh, asking if he seriously believed that would work. In response, he sent a barrage of wooden roots shooting toward Krosh, openly challenging him to block the attack with that pathetic branch. What followed left everyone stunned. Krosh moved with absurd agility, slipping through every attack with ease, dodging as if the roots were moving in slow motion. Anix froze in disbelief, unable to process what he was seeing. If this had been someone like Charlotte, a genius, he could have accepted it, but for a failure like Krosh Walheim to pull this off, the thought made his stomach sink. For a moment, he even wondered if Krosh had awakened the mind's eye. Krosh smiled confidently and said that to Anix, he was a natural enemy. He kept provoking him, casually revealing that he had already seen Anix's abilities so many times before the regression that he was sick of them. Then he threw the words straight at him, asking if he was thinking about Charlotte again. That was the breaking point. Anix completely lost his composure. As he stopped holding back, a powerful green aura burst from his body. Krosh sensed the danger instantly and leapt backward as rocks began forming around Anix. With a warning to watch his mouth, Anix summoned the fifth form of his technique, the Wooden Heaven Giant. A malicious smile spread across his face as he told Krosh to be more careful next time, clearly preparing to finish this in one blow. At that moment, a girl burst through the doorway, screaming desperately. She begged Anix to stop, shouting that if that attack hit Krosh directly, he wouldn't survive. The massive wooden giant raised its fist, ready to strike, as she warned that the consequences would be irreversible. Krosh, however, stood there with his eyes closed, completely calm. Leaves drifted down around him as a memory surfaced, one of the books from the secret library of Valhaes de Marisheim. It was the thinnest manual among the secret arts, written by an ancestor who had no talent whatsoever. That man had simply swung his sword until the age of 80, repeating basic movements endlessly. The book recorded nothing but sword swings. The secret art required a complete union between the self and the object, something impossible with shallow training. But Krosh had been forced into similar situations countless times because of the curse. Because of that, he had come to understand that ancestors' art. With that realization, Krosh declared that the sword became him and he became the sword. The branch in his hands erupted in a deep blue aura. With a single swing, a devastating blast of energy shot forward, slicing the giant's fist clean in half. The force didn't stop there. The celestial wood giant was completely obliterated, reduced to nothing but scattered remains. Krosh calmly reflected that it was a simple truth and that nothing remained but debris. The girl stared in shock, unable to believe what she had just witnessed. Bianca continued unfazed by her fiancé's power. Anix's jaw hung open as he stood frozen, disbelief etched across his face. From within the settling dust, Krosh called out to him in a cold, serious voice. He warned Anix never to be arrogant again and asked if he understood this time. Completely defeated, Anix dropped to his knees. The remains of the wood giant collapsed around them and Krosh finally felt his strength give out. His body trembled, his legs barely holding him up and even his voice failed him. Bianca rushed to his side and held him, saying she would help. Moments later, Danfelion arrived running toward them. Krosh groaned as Bianca squeezed him too tightly, and Danfelion warned her that she would kill him like that, telling her to leave it to him. Krosh silently agreed. Danfelion lifted him effortlessly onto his shoulders and carried him away. Back in the main hall, the guests erupted into gossip, unable to believe that a failure like Krosh Walheim had defeated Anix. Danfelion noticed the rumors spreading fast and wondered whether Krosh was bold or just reckless. Either way, once he woke up, he would be famous. Still, something bothered him. Anix's expression before collapsing felt wrong. He had a bad feeling that this wouldn't be the end. He warned Krosh that he wasn't allowed to die before helping him with his research. A week passed after the sanctuary incident, and Krosh was already back to his brutal training. Amid the wreckage, he finally felt free from the damage caused by his last strike. He reflected that if he had kept using the technique to corner Anix, his condition would have been far worse. He remembered losing consciousness in the carriage on the way back and regretted that, if he had stayed awake, he could have at least prepared to steal Anix's ability. He had planned two methods. One was the standard approach involving unlocking Black Hood. The other relied on guiding the opponent into devaluing their own ability. He had chosen the second method for Anix because it became easier the more overwhelmingly the opponent was defeated. Being crushed in a single strike by someone he considered a failure would plant doubt deep in Anix's mind. That doubt would spread, slowly eroding his faith in his own technique. Even if it took time, Krosh was confident that Anix's recovery ability would eventually become his. For the remaining year before the academy, Krosh resolved to train every single day and surpass the geniuses. That determination was interrupted when Arioto appeared at the door, calling for young Master Krosh. The butler informed him that Barakin Walheim had arrived at the Azure Pine Mansion. Krosh realized his brother had reached his limit, having ignored his messages twice. Lying on the sofa, Krosh sighed and said he couldn't postpone it any longer. He told Arioto to let him in. As he waited, Bianca approached with a glass of water, which he accepted awkwardly. She commented that he smelled like sweat, leaving him embarrassed. He wondered if Orayu's expelled waste and covered his nose, thinking his sense of smell might have dulled from erosion stench. When Bianca asked if he would wash up before meeting Barakin, Krosh refused, saying he'd probably be moving again soon anyway. She told him not to come near her, surprising him. He joked about her giving orders to her fiancé and thought she had grown sassier. She ran off, and Krosh chased after her, teasing her. He reflected that he treated Bianca like a little sister, but knew the people he once knew before the regression would look at him coldly. Arthur's disapproving face surfaced in his mind, asking if he had grown soft in peace and if he thought he could stop the world's destruction like that. Krosh didn't want to admit it, but Arthur had always been a hero who never lowered his guard. Barakin's voice snapped him back to reality, asking about Arthur and mocking him for playing around with his fiancée. Standing there was Barakin Walheim, the third son of the Walheim family, looking at him with pure contempt. Krosh replied calmly that sometimes a break was necessary, shocking his brother. Barakin questioned the rumor about him defeating Anix. Krosh deflected and brought up the Roharn Academy, explaining that acceptance was based on exams regardless of status. He casually suggested Barakin should prepare as well. That suggestion enraged him. Barakin sneered, telling Krosh not to get arrogant over a single victory and mocking the idea of studying. Krosh agreed, saying it was natural for common people to worry about getting in. That only made Barakin angrier. Finally, Barakin revealed the real reason for his visit, a family order. They were going to Mount Gerilak to stop a world erosion incident. Krosh was shocked. Family missions were mandatory only after 15. Barakin smirked and said he would act as guardian, mocking him by asking if the one who beat Anix was afraid. Krosh immediately saw it for what it was, a test. Still, he accepted. Even if it was a trap, he had an escape plan. As he prepared to leave, Bianca asked where he was going. He told her not to follow, smiling faintly. Barakin scoffed, irritated, but Krosh stood his ground, calling Bianca his fiancée and blocking her path. Barakin left in silent fury. Krosh patted Bianca's head and thanked her. She asked him not to pass out again. He promised, smiled, and left for the mission as she watched him go. World erosion was a phenomenon where reality was invaded by foreign dimensions. Sometimes corrupted creatures appeared. Other times the land itself mutated entirely. If left unchecked, the area could become a separate world. At Mount Gerlach, Knights discussed a newly formed swamp. The erosion was classified as 3-star and they expected mid-level experts to handle it. Barakin, already an advanced expert, should defeat the Lord without trouble. At the site, Barakin explained that he brought Krosh for first-hand experience. Krosh smiled innocently, calling him brother, while thinking that Barakin had no idea who he was talking to. He followed him for one reason: to test a provisional method to suppress the rage of extreme blood poison. As monsters swarmed, Krosh calmly instructed the knights, warning them about headless creatures that could still bite and expand. They obeyed without question. When asked if he had dealt with erosion before, Krosh deflected, saying he was only 13. Barakin laughed internally, remembering how his pride shattered at 15. Krosh openly told the knights not to compare him to Barakin, sending his brother into silent rage. Barakin imagined a future where Krosh surpassed him like Charlotte had, and the thought terrified him. The ground turned red. Krosh warned that a 3-star lord sustaining erosion alone was far more dangerous. Barakin dismissed it and ordered the knights forward. Krosh decided to focus on his own task. Realizing his perception had sharpened after mastering extreme blood poison, he ingested the corrupted substance. His eyes turned red as pain racked his body. He coughed it back up, hiding the truth. According to the manuscript, aura had to merge with erosion energy, flowing endlessly until a new hue formed. Blue energy exploded outward as Krosh activated an aura-based sixth sense. The erosion weakened. Blood stained his lips, but he smiled, satisfied. Absorbing world-eroding energy always triggers a risk. For that, he would need Bianca's snow doll curse. Still, he managed to suppress it. Another step forward, then Krosh felt something wrong. A grotesque creature emerged, rocky body, human faces embedded in its limbs, opening its eyes. With a thunderous scream, the thousand-faced demon appeared, shocking Krosh and Barakin, a 3-star monster. Barakin shouted for battle. His sword ignited with blue flames as he activated Ignis, engulfed in fire. Krosh watched, remembering how that same power had burned his arm in the past and how unbalanced Barakin had been before the regression. And this time the real fight was only beginning. Krosh Walheim wondered for a brief moment how his brother was doing now. A malicious smile crept onto his face as he hoped, deep down, that Barakin hadn't changed at all. That thought barely had time to settle before chaos erupted. One of the knights was suddenly struck by something unseen, his face beginning to blur and peel away as if reality itself was erasing it. Another knight screamed in agony, his voice cracking as panic spread through the formation. Someone shouted that it was a curse, one that erased faces, and his voice trembled as he added that even the senior knights were struggling against the monster's countless arms. That was when Barakin stepped forward. He raised his voice over the chaos and ordered everyone to advance. Flames roared to life as he gripped his sword, and in a single powerful leap he closed the distance and unleashed a blazing strike. The monster cried out as the attack landed cleanly, fire spreading across its grotesque body. Cracks formed, pieces crumbling away under the heat. Turning back to his men, Barakin yelled at them not to lose heart, saying he would create an opening through sheer power. The knights were stunned, their fear momentarily replaced by awe. Of course they thought this was Lord Barakin. Encouraged, they surged forward without hesitation. As Barakin pressed the attack, his gaze flicked sideways, instinctively searching for Krosh. He didn't see him anywhere. With quiet contempt, he wondered if that useless brother of his had already been wiped from the world. One of the knights noticed that Barakin wasn't watching the battlefield at all, but staring directly at the thousand-faced demon. Barakin snapped his attention back to the fight just in time to see something deeply wrong. The monster was crying tears of blood. The countless skulls embedded in its body began leaking the same dark liquid, dripping down like a grotesque rain. The sight made his stomach sink. This was bad. Whatever was happening, it was escalating far too quickly. Without warning, black tentacles erupted from the creature and lashed out toward the knights. A crushing pressure flooded the air, making Barakin's breath hitch. He realized then that the thousand-faced demon had to be finished immediately before things spiraled any further out of control. He shouted for all the knights to concentrate their attacks on the monster and swung his sword, releasing another massive wave of fire. Nothing happened. The attack didn't even slow it down. Barakin felt a chill run through him as he wondered why not even aura-infused strikes were working. He had no time to dwell on it. Gritting his teeth, he prepared another attack and yelled for his men not to lose courage, reminding them that they were knights of the Walheim family. No one moved, every knight stood frozen in place, eyes wide, bodies refusing to respond. Barakin felt a surge of unease. What the hell was going on? He hadn't even touched the monster. Was this another curse? Then it hit him. The earlier anomaly, the strange behavior of the demon, all of it had been a trap. Understanding dawned too late. The thousand-faced demon stared directly at him, its gaze heavy with malice. The world shifted. Rain began to pour, heavy and relentless, thunder cracking across the sky as lightning split the darkness. In the middle of the storm, a memory surfaced, one Barakin had buried deep. He remembered lying on the ground, utterly desperate, convinced that he was about to die. At that rate, he would surely be caught. The monster had approached him back then, claws raised, ready to end it. He remembered wondering why this was happening to him, unable to accept that this was how his life would end. A female voice echoed in his mind, sharp and merciless. She called him an idiot and asked if this was really how the strongest of Walheim would meet his end. She mocked him, saying his younger sister had surpassed him, that after all his bluffing he'd lost the entire knightly order and tried to save himself by running away. She called him a pathetic failure who deserved to die. The monster struck. Barakin screamed as he tried to shield himself, but the blow landed squarely, overwhelming and brutal. At the last possible second, Krosh appeared. He threw Barakin over his shoulder and ran, sprinting through the storm as the world collapsed behind them. When Barakin finally regained consciousness, he was lying on the ground, vision blurred. He struggled to focus, trying to understand who had saved him. Krosh stood before him, smiling, clearly relieved that his brother had woken up. Confused and disoriented, Barakin demanded to know what that good-for-nothing was doing there. Krosh explained calmly that he had survived and watched the entire fight from a distance. He said he saw when Barakin was swallowed by the swamp and that he'd pulled Barakin out the moment things went south. Barakin brushed it off, insisting he was fine and could walk on his own. Krosh stepped closer, his tone sharp but controlled, asking how exactly Barakin planned to walk when he couldn't even use his aura. With a provocative grin, Krosh asked if his brother was really sure he didn't need help. Humiliation burned through Barakin. Grinding his teeth, he slapped Krosh's hand away and shouted that he didn't need help from an idiot like him. The bravado lasted only a second. Terror surged as he realized the danger they were still in. He asked desperately if the thousand-faced demon was still nearby and how far they were from the battlefield. Krosh admitted he had no idea. They had been walking for a long time without escaping, which could only mean one thing: the world erosion had sealed itself. The realization hit Barakin like a hammer. Unless they defeated the creature, there was no way out. He cursed bitterly, frustration spilling over while Krosh called him brother, trying to calm him down. Then Krosh revealed it. He said Charlotte had taught him a finishing secret art. The same one he had used to fight Anix at the Star Sanctuary. Barakin was stunned. Charlotte, a secret art. For a brief moment, memories surfaced and he wondered if he'd ever harbored feelings for Charlotte and her siblings, all born of the same mother. Back in the present, Barakin asked if that technique could really defeat the thousand-faced demon. Krosh answered without hesitation that it could. He said that instead of dodging until they died inside the erosion, it was better to fight. He held out his hand, saying he understood if Barakin didn't trust him. Then he played his final card and asked if Barakin at least trusted Charlotte's strength. That left Barakin speechless. Leaning heavily on his sword, he stood and agreed. After all, Charlotte was a genius. Still, he warned that if the plan failed, they would both die. Dark aura began to seep from them as Krosh smiled with quiet confidence and said it wouldn't fail. A sound echoed through the forest. Something was coming. The sound grew louder, branches snapping somewhere in the distance. Krosh pulled Barakin down behind a cluster of bushes and lowered his voice, warning him that the thousand-faced demon was approaching. He asked if Barakin's Ignis was ready. Barakin answered by summoning a small flame in his hand, the familiar heat flickering weakly but steady enough. With everything prepared, Krosh said it was time to start the operation. He stepped forward. In that instant, Krosh's body was completely engulfed in a blue aura. The energy wrapped around him like a second skin as he closed his eyes and focused, shutting everything else out. Watching from behind, Barakin felt his breath catch. He couldn't believe what he was seeing. How could the good-for-nothing have such terrifying concentration? The blue aura flowed into Krosh's sword, coating the blade as if it were being reforged by pure will. Krosh's eyes glowed faintly as the aura intensified, and Barakin realized he had never seen such a pure manifestation of power in his life. It reminded him of the moment when Krosh had asked to combine Ignis with Charlotte's secret technique. Back then, Barakin had scoffed at the idea. Now, watching this, he couldn't help but wonder how his younger brother had managed to master an aura he himself had never achieved. Krosh called out to him, snapping Barakin out of his thoughts. He asked him to hand over Ignis. Barakin hesitated, his pride screaming at him to refuse. Still, he clenched his jaw and summoned the flame again. As the fire transferred to Krosh's sword, it burned brighter, fiercer, completely overwhelming Barakin's own control. Krosh stood there, weapon humming with power, while Barakin could only watch in stunned silence. Krosh glanced back and asked if something was wrong. He added casually that there seemed to be enough time to execute the plan properly, meaning Barakin wouldn't need to stall the enemy. That realization hit Barakin hard. He stared at the blade, noticing that the flames burning along Krosh's sword were far more intense than anything he could produce himself. With that level of power, the thousand-faced demon didn't stand a chance. Memories flooded back, his men being wiped out in an instant, the overwhelming pressure, the shame of fleeing just to save himself. A bitter thought surfaced. If Krosh really defeated the demon, then Barakin would be remembered as the true failure of the entire ordeal. The doubt gnawed at him. Was he really weaker than the brother he'd always looked down on? Krosh moved. In a single, decisive strike, he brought the flaming sword down. The blade sliced cleanly through the thousand-faced demon, splitting it in half as if it were nothing. Barakin froze, eyes wide, unable to process what he had just witnessed. A massive explosion followed, fire consuming everything in its path. The storm vanished, the erosion dissolved, and calm sunlight broke through, bathing the ruined land in silence. A voice called out. Krosh emerged from the fading flames, hair still smoldering as he announced that it was over. Barakin forced a smile and muttered that it had been too easy. His grip tightened around his sword. Hatred twisted his face as he suddenly screamed for the good-for-nothing to die. Without hesitation, Barakin attacked from behind. Krosh reacted instantly, turning just in time to block the strike. Confusion flickered across his face. Barakin snarled, wondering why he couldn't use Ignis. Krosh thanked him instead, a sinister smile forming as a purple aura seeped from his sword. He thanked Barakin for being exactly the same as before. A window appeared in the air. It displayed the conditions required to unlock Barakin's lock. The first condition was to voluntarily entrust part of Ignis to the target. The second was to acknowledge that the target used Ignis better than himself. The final condition was the complete collapse of his pride. Krosh drove his fist into Barakin's stomach and explained calmly that the moment Barakin used that attack, Ignis became his. As the remains of the thousand-faced demon continued to burn, a scream echoed through the clearing. Barakin collapsed to the ground, completely defeated. Krosh stood over him, calling his name, holding what appeared to be the monster's core in his hand. He admitted that at first, he truly hoped to get along with his brother and the others. A memory surfaced of a younger Krosh sitting on the ground, looking lost, while Barakin told him to stop messing around. That wish, he said, had never come true. Pressing his sword against Barakin, Krosh said all of this was the result of his hostility. He confessed that part of him had hoped Barakin might finally recognize him as a brother. But that possibility had never existed. As Barakin groaned in pain, Krosh asked if it hurt. He recalled the time Barakin had burned his arm and face, saying he'd writhed in pain just the same. He watched Barakin's body writhing in pain. A bitter laugh escaped him as he glanced up at the sky and remarked, almost mockingly, that the weather was nice. Back at the Walheim main estate, news of the Nightly Order's annihilation spread rapidly. People whispered that the erosion had been upgraded to 5-star, a level requiring elite experts. At the funeral, guests commented that if it hadn't been for Barakin's sacrifice, Krosh would never have survived. Barakin's personal butler erupted in rage, demanding to know how the failure was the only one left alive. The head butler shut him down immediately, reminding him to mind his words. He emphasized that this was the brother Lord Barakin had protected with his life, and that his honorable death must not be tarnished. Krosh walked away in silence, far from the mourning crowd, thinking that since everyone believed the official account, there was nothing left to worry about. Thanks to his brother, the expedition had yielded significant gains. He could now use extreme blood poison and had confirmed that his sixth sense allowed him to control the rage it induced. Through Ignis, he had also unlocked the Black Flame. Ignis, an ability capable of igniting anything, had been devastatingly effective when applied to world erosion. The Black Flame had far exceeded his expectations as a trump card. The only unresolved issue at the main house was the investigation into the abnormal phenomenon at the erosion site. Krosh knocked at the door. Krosh was told to enter, thinking they likely hadn't uncovered the cause yet. Instead, he learned that it was the work of the world eroders, its main body submerged in an eternal dream, unable to perceive reality except through the eyes of its lackeys. The undead, if they were already moving, it meant he might encounter that lackey sooner than expected. Then a woman greeted him, calling him Lord Krosh. She introduced herself as Saphira, a fourth-class investigator from the World Erosion Investigation Team, saying she had been waiting for him. Krosh's gaze immediately locked onto a black star mark on her neck. Shock ran through him. Finding one of them so soon was beyond unexpected. He laughed softly, confusing her, and without hesitation called her an undead, saying he wanted to make a deal. Pointing at her, he declared that he would erase her immortality. Her smile sharpened as she asked if he was, by any chance, a regressor. Her body shifted as her true form surfaced, and she said she had been searching for something else, never expecting to stumble upon such unexpected prey. Only then did Krosh recognize her for what she truly was, the undead known as the Crimson Garden August. The name stirred memories he hadn't intended to revisit. Before the regression, following Arthur's orders, he had once attempted to steal her immortality and failed. Back then, they discovered that stripping her immortality would force her to focus entirely on regenerating her physical body, leaving her unable to control her lackeys. She spoke almost wistfully, saying the only reason she maintained so many subordinates was because her true body was immobilized by a curse. There was something almost apologetic in her tone, as if she genuinely pitied him. Another woman scoffed at that, asking what part of that situation was worth lamenting and whether she had forgotten how much suffering he caused by raising the erosion level. She told her to stop acting like a saint. The undead tried to apologize, saying that wasn't what she meant. Arthur cut in, stating flatly that the problem with the undead had already been resolved and ordering them to stop the pointless arguing. Arthur sighed, then turned his attention back to Krosh. He remarked that it was a shame he had failed to steal her immortality. Krosh laughed and agreed. Krosh added that even if he were reborn, it would be impossible to succeed. The reason was simple. The condition to unlock her lock was to surpass her in strength, something practically impossible. Back in the present, Krosh asked what exactly made her believe he was a regressor. She explained that the moment a mere child proposed such an outrageous deal, she knew it would be impossible unless he had already lived through time once. She accused him of being nothing more than a regressor trapped by the mockery of time itself, claiming that was why he could never defeat an existence that transcended time. She told him to stop lying. Krosh answered by raising his hand. A purple construct formed in the air, a grotesque hand with a mouth embedded in its palm. Without hesitation, he unleashed it toward her. The investigator's eyes widened as she realized the technique could steal even immortality. She recognized it instantly. Black Hood. Her fist tightened as she made a decision. She admitted that she had continued raising the erosion level for one reason only, to find someone capable of ending her life. Looking at Krosh now, admiration replaced hostility. The one who could steal the curse of immortality had finally appeared. Calmly, she asked what the terms of the deal were. Krosh laid out his plan. He told her she needed to cooperate with him so he could grow stronger because Black Hood would not activate unless he surpassed her in power. She smiled, understanding immediately. He was asking to become her disciple. She reflected that she had long since been prepared to sell her soul if it meant being freed from immortality. Her eyes glowed red as she accepted. She unleashed her aura fully and declared that she, the Crimson Garden August, would turn him into the strongest man in the world. The pressure alone nearly crushed him. Krosh realized he was being overwhelmed just by her aura, and this wasn't even her main body. Even so, he felt certain, if she truly cooperated, his strength would skyrocket. Clenching his fist, he vowed that even if he had to borrow the power of an Eridor, he would stop the world erosion. It was then revealed that a skill was a unique technique granted to only one individual in the world. Following that rule, the regression skill had returned to Arthur in this timeline, making it impossible for Krosh to regress on his own. If the world ended here, his existence would vanish along with it. He told her he was counting on her from now on and casually shortened her name to Krim. She blinked, irritated, correcting him and saying her name was Krosh, not Krim. She grabbed his face, glaring, and yelled at him to call her master. Krosh pulled away and said he could finally go home. She questioned whether this place wasn't already his home. He replied that he hadn't lived there in years. It had been so long, he admitted, that he couldn't even remember his parents' faces. A hooded woman appeared and announced that her lady was summoning him. Krosh was startled. He wondered if his mother had finally taken an interest in him after hearing the rumors about his change, considering she had never once appeared at the Azure Pine Mansion. The woman confirmed it, adding that the master of the house had returned from the Forbidden Region and wished to meet him. The idea of meeting his father left Krosh stunned. His father was an existence that had reached the realm of a demigod. Maybe he had sensed something through the stars. The woman informed him that he was to stay at the main house and that this was Lady Arya's message. Krosh refused. He couldn't afford to waste time idling there. Bianca was waiting, and he had too much to do. Realizing that the instruction wasn't a direct order from his father, he declared that he was leaving and would only return when summoned properly. The investigator and the hooded woman stared in shock. With a provocative smile, Krosh added that his father was free to come meet him himself. With that, he departed in a carriage with the investigator. The scene shifted to a city dominated by a massive castle, surrounded by forest. Inside the carriage, Krosh stretched and said he was finally free, with no intention of returning to the main house anytime soon. Suddenly, the investigator appeared outside the window in her demonic form, pounding on the glass and calling him a rude disciple. Startled, Krosh asked about her flashy color. She brushed it off, saying she could change colors at will, transforming into a black crow and asking how she looked. He replied that she was black, just like her wicked heart. She called him an idiot. He asked about her main body, and she snapped back that he already knew it couldn't move, calling him an unpleasant regressor. Krosh thought briefly that while Arthur was the true regressor, he was merely borrowing the power. There was no need to explain that to her. The carriage arrived. Stepping down, Krosh warned her that there was a white-haired girl at the Azure Pine Mansion and asked her to be gentle. She looked confused, wondering who he meant. At that moment, Bianca appeared, wearing a chick costume, cheerfully welcoming Krosh home. He turned to the investigator and asked if she'd seen that. Arioto came running, calling for young Master Krosh and asking if anything had happened during his absence. The butler informed him that a letter from Lord Barakan had arrived. Krosh sighed as he opened it. The alchemist wrote that the medicine for the discoloration disease was complete and that, thinking of Krosh, he had prepared it immediately and would deliver it soon. Krosh shook his head, thinking the world was full of eccentrics, but this was excessive even by those standards. He instructed Arioto that if someone named Danfelion appeared, he was to be treated with the utmost hospitality. The old butler bowed and agreed. Suddenly, the butler seemed to remember something and spoke up, saying that Lady Bianca had been worried about Krosh Waldheim the entire time. Arioto confirmed it right away and explained that when she heard the report saying the young master had been caught in the erosion, she immediately tried to travel to the main house to look for him. That alone was enough to hit him harder than expected. Krosh felt genuinely touched by her concern. He realized he hadn't checked Bianca's lock in a while, and because of that worry she showed for him, he decided to take a look again. The first condition to unlock her lock had been to become friends with Bianca. To his complete shock, the moment he checked it, the condition was fulfilled. The lock unlocked successfully. Krosh froze on the spot. Bianca's first lock had finally been opened. He was so stunned that he just stared at her, unable to react properly. And that's where we'll leave things for today. If you want to know what happens next, make sure to hit the subscribe button and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next part.